So, welcome everyone. It's great to have you with us and with Alexandra. We did this call. The reason why we're doing it again is because I flopped on the recording on this. So I have two means of recording for this one to make sure that we capture all the juicy topics that were covered. It was a really powerful session we did with you, Alexandra. I think, to give some context for everyone else in the group, I found Alexandra through just the nature of tuning into that inner source. I would say it always brings you to the right people. And, I had been through a journey of nutrition and transformation of that nutrition, and the means in which I approached and the intention by which I approached food for quite some time. I just posted recently my journey with different diets and approaches and things of this nature. And after going through the detoxing process for maybe this past 3 to 4 years, it was very clear to me that there was many very appropriate and specific and detailed and effective approaches. But I did find that there was maybe it was the overbearing masculine approach to it. I don't know. And maybe Alexandra embodies that feminine element of approaching it in a bit more of a balanced way, so that those who maybe look at detoxing from a vantage point of, I only eat meat, or I've never done anything like this before, who are, maybe turned off or frightened from making those steps. I find with this a balanced approach, you can really, no matter where you're coming from, no matter what your background or how you're currently eating, you can approach it in a similar way with some adjustments, but in a means in which doesn't separate you from some grand glamorous concept like detoxing, because it's not. It's a very natural approach that I find with this balanced means of focusing upon it. We can all benefit and reap the rewards. So that's really how I was brought to Alexandra. I really adored her energy and her balanced approach with how anyone can start it, no matter where you're coming from. And so I feel like that is really where we're focusing upon today: is how can we understand the means of detoxing, of the mucus-free diet? How can, no matter where we're at on our path, utilize the principles of it and start applying it? And recognizing the beginning and end concept really is not applicable. It's you're turning this into an ever-present lifestyle in which can fluctuate, but the mucus-free lifestyle is much more appropriate than some sort of diet or even protocol. It's really just the entire approach to one's life, which I found was really interesting in our first call. So I won't be talking too much in this one, as I usually do. I want to give everything to Alexandra, let her flow with all the knowledge she has. So maybe, Alexandra, like we started the first call, if you can share your path, your journey, how this has unfolded for you, and why you're so passionate about the work you're doing with so many people.
Right. Thank you, Corey. Yeah, so my journey it really started sort of in my early 20s, when I was living in California, coming from Italy, and in big California, where everything was about health and fitness. And so I got into bodybuilding and all of that. And from there, really my journey into interest about body and health and how it relates also with consciousness and everything. That's really where it started. The seed was planted. And then later, as I journeyed deeper into consciousness, I found Ayurveda, and I studied it in India. Didn't sort of complete my studies per se, but I did for many years follow it and study it. And it was this perpetual journey of like, okay, so there's this information which is always presented as this is the way, and then there's this other way that says this is the way, and then eventually it was paleo and keto and low carb and high carb, and all these various ways. And then eventually I found, well, my body crashed. And I had this huge health crisis about 5 years ago, which actually, it was also not, in hindsight, it wasn't just a crash. It was a slow sneaking up. And then eventually the body just crashed. But I guess I couldn't see the warning signs because I was so stuck in my head thinking, but I'm doing the right things. I know that I know everything, and I'm eating clean. And therefore, why should I be having health issues? Clearly, one more supplement, one more this will do it. And eventually my body crashed. And that's when I had to sort of like really relook at everything and go, wow, clearly you know nothing, and everything that you learned somehow got you here. And so I really just wiped my slate clean, and I dove deep into research in sort of like the darkest recesses of the nutrition um, sort of whatever studies. And I decided, okay, all this mainstream stuff clearly is not where the answers lie. And I started finding all these fasting groups, which initially seemed, and I had never really fasted. I mean, I did a period of raw foods in my early 20s, but at the time it didn't fit my lifestyle. It made me way too flighty. And so when I found these new fasting sites, and then eventually the mucusless system, and Dr. Morse, and there's all these sort of, they all fall under the hat of natural hygiene practitioners. And initially, a lot of it did not make any sense, because essentially it was going completely against the grain of what the general consensus was saying. Like, a high fruit diet, are we crazy? This is like high sugar, why would anybody want to do that? And obviously then the dry fasting, which means no water, no food also. But hello, we've been taught we need to drink water, and lots of it. But eventually I sort of gave all these things a try, because there was nothing else left to do. And I slowly unraveled. It was sort of a learning of a year and a half of just going against everything that I knew, and going the opposite way, and going like, okay, this might be totally crazy, I might be killing myself here, but there's nothing left to do. And in that, I gained so much understanding. And I do think that a lot of my understanding, or especially my sort of ability to shift out of the old way of doing things into the new way, I sort of give thanks to having done a lot of work with the sacred teacher plants. I don't know if any of you know of work with the teacher plants, but so, because that obviously, that opened my mind to the paradox, and to going against the grain and all of that, and finding truth in unconventional ways. And so I think, and also in understanding that a lot of that everything that we consume affects our consciousness, and that therefore whatever we have ingested to this day has also contributed to our emotional imbalance, and how the two are really always connected, And so you cannot just take and look at the body, and you cannot just look at the mind or the emotions, but everything. We are a unison, we are a symphony of everything. And unless we look at everything, and unless we work at everything together, in my opinion and in my experience more than anything else, we cannot fully heal. Especially things, I mean, to me it applies to everything, but essentially even something in particular, autoimmune conditions and all these sort of mystery illnesses, cancers, there's always such deep emotional linkage. And so for me, that is when I then unraveled my own healing path, and came to a point of feeling my, obviously healing in a sense, detoxing is never complete, because you're always on a journey, it's always a dance, and you're always going between alkaline and acidic, like we often talk, me included, I say, you need to be alkaline, and then I go, okay, well actually there's no such thing as really becoming alkaline, because the lymphatic system will always be acidic and the blood system will always be alkaline, and we need a balance of alkaline and acidity in the body. Just as, will we ever be all good? No. Or is anybody all bad? No, we always are the yin yang, and it's just about learning to balance that. And so it's the same thing with health. But for me, the biggest learning was, and why I'm so passionate about this, is because it taught me, the system taught me in a very embodied way, what creates obstruction and what removes obstruction. How does it feel when the body is obstructed? How does it feel when I ingest things that are that cause obstruction in the body versus how does the body feel when it's freed progressively of obstruction, and to learn to dance between the two, and that there is no such thing as good food and bad food. There's only foods that create obstruction or remove obstruction, and we need to be somewhere in between. Because what I've learned also is that, you know, it's very easy on this path, as in any path, to become extreme. And as much as I've been extreme in all ways possible, good and bad, my ultimate goal for me, the way that I want to love myself the most, is by walking what I call the golden path, which is the path that is just soft and sweet and surrendered. It, you know, there's without rigidity. And it's so easy to become, just as, you know, with a lot of like the vegan movement, one can become so righteous about it, and one can be so righteous about the ketogenic diet, and one can become so righteous about raw foods, you know, that unless you're eating raw foods, you're not enlightened, you know, and you stand no chance for enlightenment, never mind health. And I'd rather, it's what works for me, how can I love myself best, and how can I really embody my teachings and not just follow dogmatic thinking and kind of, you know, shoot off on that tangent and never stop to actually feel that, for example, sometimes creating a bit of obstruction in the body and giving in to certain desires of the body or the soul is okay, because there is a teaching, there is a learning, even in regression, you know.
That's a beautiful point. I think we could wrap up right there. I think that's a wonderful point, you know, because that really is the essence of, you know, the entirety of, like you're saying, of what many people fall into the trap with when it comes to not only nutrition, but any means of transformation, whether that's shamanism or yoga or nutrition or, you know, some other personal development ideology. It's you know, not recognizing that everything is a double-edged sword and everything has an equal degree of love and fear within it. So if one, you know, it's like snake poison, it can kill you, it could also heal you of many things. So if one is attached to an idealistic, dogmatic viewpoint on anything in particular, then that masculine rigidity is always coming in the way of the feminine flow and the creativity of, you know, each moment. And I found that the you know, one thing, I think it was Abraham Hicks, I think it was an Abraham Hicks teaching, and it was in regards to the nature of, okay, you know, I don't think, you know, smoking or drinking alcohol is going to bring me to enlightenment, or, you know, it's going to detract me from the path. And the way in which, you know, Abraham kind of reformulated it, which was, you know, on a scale from 0 to 100, 100 being the worst for you, 0 being the you know, the best for you. Alcohol and you know, cigarettes is maybe at like a 15 or 20, whereas guilt and shame is like a 95 or, you know, a 99. And so it's always about that paradoxical viewpoint of how we're approaching, you know, each meal, which, you know, we'll get into, because I know you have an interesting approach to how you eat and, you know, really involving yourself in each meal, but just coming from that place of paradoxical love, in which is pure and which is, you know, just essential for, you know, no matter what kind of meal you're diving into or what approach you're taking. So I think that's a beautiful point. So thank you for that, Alexandra. But one thing I would say, maybe to clarify in the sense of the term obstruction, is maybe really going into what obstruction means and what foods create obstruction versus what foods maybe, you know, reduce or clear out obstruction.
Right. You froze for a moment, but I got the gist of your question. So yeah, so basically the whole the way to look at health and the way to look at nutrition is really to step away from the dogmatic thinking that anything is good or bad, and understanding that certain foods, every day, 95% of that stuff, no matter whether it's gluten-free or whether it's high in fat or whatever, it's mucus producing, and it produces obstruction in the body. And so taking away from all ideologies and food philosophies, scrape all of that away, and then you look, does this food create obstruction in the body, yes or no? Yes, it does. 95% of the stuff that we see in the supermarket creates obstruction in the body and was never really meant for human consumption, certainly not on a daily basis. So that's kind of like important to understand that what we were meant to be eating, what we are meant to be eating, the majority of times is really fruit. That's the bulk of our diet. Then it's greens, as in the high water content greens, which actually most of them are fruits anyway, like cucumbers and peppers and tomatoes. Even baby marrow, zucchini is actually a fruit. And then we can add sprouts and green leafy salads and all of that. That's all stuff that doesn't create mucus in the body, as well as some of the grains. They create little mucus, but it's relatively little. In incorporating yourself mucus lean, you're going to be fine with that. And those are things like quinoa, spelt millet, and teff flour, which teff, for example, is not even a grain. Corey disappeared. We'll just wait until he. So yeah, the grains, and then we've got starchy things like sweet potato, which are also, they create very little mucus in the body, versus white potato do create mucus in the body. At the same time, when we talk about mucus producing and not, and then people hear, oh, but white potato, and it's like, well, when you're coming off a meat eating diet, it's okay to substitute with something like white potatoes and a lot of leafy greens, because it's a transition. And then eventually you will be able, once your body starts clearing a lot of mucus and obstruction, which, by the way, the mucus that is in the body and the obstruction, that is what holds pathogens in the body. So for example, candida and parasites and all of that, they are able to thrive and exist, parasites in particular, only when the internal terrain is conducive for these pathogens to thrive. In a proper balanced alkaline environment, no parasite will be able to survive. But until they are thriving, you will crave the food that the parasite wants you to eat, which is typically, the starchy food, as well as meats and fats and sort of like the typical greasy foods. That's why we get these cravings. I mean, I now do, not that I'm free of all cravings, but I'm saying I now do crave fruit. But I remember like years ago, like I would never get this like, oh my goodness, I need to have a big bowl of papaya. Like just never happened, right? The big, oh my goodness, I need was croissants, pizza, pasta, all the typical things that sort of like basically create mucus and feed the parasites. But not only do they create the parasite, do they feed the parasites and the pathogens, they also foster a certain emotional matrix within us. And for example, candida in particular, like we call it candida consciousness. They typically, they're lethargic, they feel disempowered, they feel like there's no juice, there's no zest for life, there's no creativity flowing through them. And that's because that is the candida that creates this heaviness and this level of consciousness that desires all these obstructive and heavy and sort of disempowered. And so what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did first the candida and then the foods, or vice versa? Who knows? But the point is they're inexorably linked. And so, and also on the other hand, it's because when we have all this obstruction, which always then comes with heavy metal toxicity, because we all have been exposed to too many toxins that contain heavy metals. A lot of people have amalgams in there, so mercury in their teeth, or we were born from a mother that had mercury in her teeth. The mercury leaks into the bones during pregnancy with mercury in my body. And that, obviously I didn't know that. And for years and years and years, I suffered from the consequences of that, not really knowing, like, why do I always feel so lethargic? Why do I always feel like a little bit of brain fog? And, and obviously progressively as I got older, it got worse because the stuff never got out of my body. And so it happens for a lot of people. They feel well until a certain age, and then sort of like things start accumulating in the body, and then the body sort of all of a sudden crashes. But actually, it's been this accumulation. And so when we understand that A, all these foods create obstruction, and then B, the various toxins in anymore, but all these people, they had what is it called, like the softeners, these soft sheets that you put in the dryer that smell so nice. I use them, and they keep them everywhere, in the car, in the house. They're like everywhere because it smells so nice. And that stuff is so toxic. Those are they create estrogen in the body, and they disrupt your endocrine system. And so it goes. And then it's like, well, it's the food, it's the medication that we take in, and all of that, before we know it, most people don't even think, but those that maybe have the consciousness, that sort of have the awareness that these things create obstruction, it's like, oh, but it's just this, it's just that. But then you accumulate, and the body can't get rid of all this stuff. And so when we start removing obstruction in the body, it's first getting rid of all the obvious, like the toxins that we take in from the outside, the cleaning products, self-care products, and all that. Then the next step is we move towards looking at the foods that create obstruction. And the biggest one is always like the top, dairy. All dairy products are hugely mucus producing, and they clog up your lymphatic system. And I always see those people that have had a lot of dairy in their life are harder to detox than the people that haven't. And that's because dairy really creates, and if you think of butter and cheese and milk, I mean, it's not just greasy, it's sticky as well. So just imagine what it does in your body, and then obviously all animal products essentially are mucus producing and produce obstruction in the body, so including the meats and animal fats and all of that. And there it's also important to realize that animal protein, we'll get to protein just now, but animal protein in particular creates 68% obstruction on average in the body. And so what you're left with is, that's the nutrition that you're actually getting. So you're by every time that you ingest animal product, you have to think 68% of that piece of meat that you're eating is actually creating obstruction in the body. And so that's why also it's so much better if you take protein, which we don't really need protein, because what we actually need out of the protein are the amino acids, because everybody's always talking protein. But actually what you need to build muscles is not protein, it's the amino acids that are in the protein. So basically, when we take in animal products, the body first has to utilize its own metabolic energy to go and break that piece of meat down to retrieve the amino acids. So it's huge energy expenditure versus getting those same amino acids from fruit, and there's enough amino acids in fruit and vegetables and sprouts and greens, so that you can absolutely get enough protein amino acids to build your body without the energy expenditure. So essentially, that's why you need less energy, and you need to eat less density when you eat fruit and vegetables. Does that make sense? Whereas most people think the contrary. Most people think, oh, now, and I did that, or I did all of that too, and I am also still in the process of learning how little I actually need, because we've all been so entrained in eating a lot of food. And especially when we start moving away from the animal products, then we have this idea, well, I'm not eating any protein, so therefore, like, I need to eat a lot of fruit, I need to eat a lot of vegetables. And the reality is you don't. Is there any questions, anything that you want to ask?
Yeah, that's great. I feel it's segueing perfectly into how naturally one would approach the mucusless free or the mucus free protocol, and just the detoxifying method from that balanced way of, I always go back to your mucus free November post that you had, which had a very accurate and balanced way in which anyone really at whatever stage they're at is able to start, implementing this process. I think that'd be a perfect piece to go into.
Yeah. So essentially, the way that you start moving into living mucus free is the first step. I always say the easiest for some is you start taking out animal products. And obviously, the first one is leave out all your dairy. And initially, have some nuts and seeds, even though if you want to strictly go mucus lean, then Brazil nuts and walnuts are the only two nuts that are really mucus lean, mucus free, or create minimal mucus. Whereas things like cashews and almonds do create mucus in the body. Again, when I teach my clients, when I take my clients, I don't, I sort of leave them a lot of leeway at the beginning. And I say, let's just start taking out all animal products. And don't worry about, leaving out peanuts and almonds and whatever, because actually, if you're leaving out animal products and you're moving towards an all plant-based, high fruit, high raw vegetable diet, then already you are doing a huge leap towards improving your health radically. And a lot of people do experience detoxification symptoms and all of that, making that step. And I think that's where, for example, a lot of the radical mucus-free people, or the radical raw foodists, they go, but Alex, how can you say that this is okay? It's like, well, the reality is it is hard to change our food habits. There is so much emotion attached to eating certain foods that, in my experience, and especially for us women, who often, men too, but women who've battled with eating disorders like I also have, I figure I don't want to give myself anxiety over food. And so I always knew that I need to do this as elegant and as easy and as beautiful for myself as possible, because otherwise I'm just going to go into binging mode and I'm going to go into self-sabotage. And so rather do it progressively, especially if you don't have an acute health issue. It's different. If I work with a cancer patient, it's like, well, sorry, there's no time to gradually get you to, incorporate these foods. It's like right into fruit only and fasting, and that's that. And then we worry about reintegrating you later. But when you don't have that, when you have the luxury of slowly making the move, then do it elegantly. That's kind of my philosophy. And so I will tell you strictly what you should be doing, but also what are the other options. And then after we remove animal products is remove certainly all your gluten products. You know, definitely conventional wheat and all of that is a big no-no because it creates way too much mucus. It's hybrid. We all react to that in one way or another. But then move towards products that are 100% spelt, or quinoa and spelt, a mixture. Teff is also a great substitute, and you can do a lot with that, and it's very cheap. And millet, you know, I literally have it maybe like 4 or 5 times a year now. But in the beginning, I loved substituting millet because it gave me that heavy feeling. So that's sort of like an easy progression that you can do. And then eventually from there, you try to move towards higher fruit, higher and higher fruit. And maybe sometimes you interject, you say, okay, today I'm going to have just fruit today, and I'm going to see how that feels. And then, the cravings are coming back. I need a spelt pizza or a spelt pasta or whatever with a lot of greens and a lot of vegetables to kind of prevent me from binging on, you know, whatever it is, ice cream. So it is learning to work the system to make it work for you.
Great. Yeah, that's beautiful. I feel it's that balanced approach that doesn't provide any resistance in the initial doorway. And I think that's where most people give up, is that initial kind of week or two where, you know, it's either they go too extreme and then the pain is too much. So that pain just creates such an intensity of withdrawal symptoms really from the food and shoots them back in the opposite direction. And this method kind of just like eases anyone into it. So that momentum, that 1% increment can be created, and that the momentum naturally can be built. I would say then, you know, moving into the depth of the detoxing process, which generally results into what you've been speaking about, which is the fasting. Where does fasting come in? And maybe more importantly, why is fasting kind of the supreme healer in a sense?
Right. Well, one of my greatest fasting teachers, Gino DeSerio from the Master Fast System, he taught me that there is no such thing as deep cellular healing whilst eating. And for me also initially, that was like, what do you mean they can't heal? You know, that's impossible. But the reality is that our body, everybody, has a perfectly inbuilt system of healing us of anything. It's just that we have forgotten. And at the same time, all the ancient civilizations and certainly all the various religions of the world, they all have some form of fasting incorporated. And it's like, well, why? Why is it all the big masters of the world, they've all had some fasting experiences. And that's what eventually kind of like made the bridge for me. Well, there must be something to it. But on a purely physical, and science, is getting there more and more, but has gotten, I mean, there's now hundreds of articles about, you know, fasting and intermittent fasting and all the benefits and so forth. And lately also a lot of talk that's circulating and articles circulating on dry fasting. And dry fasting in particular, which is when we consume no food, no water for a certain amount of hours at a time, starting with 18 hours a day, or even starting with 12 hours a day, including sleep, obviously, and then slowly moving up to 18 hours a day, and then maybe having once a week a 24-hour period. What happens in the dry fasting is that the body goes into a process called autophagy. And autophagy, and it was actually some Japanese guy that won a Nobel Prize of Physics, I think it was last year, for explaining in great detail what happens during the process of autophagy. And essentially, sort of the short explanation is that the healthy and strong cells in our body, they become incinerators for the weaker cells, the diseased cells in the body, because the body always goes after the weakest link and that which it needs the least in periods of stress. So the body starts basically this process of auto-cannibalism, and it eats up the diseased cells, which it obviously doesn't really need, and the waste, that becomes incinerated for metabolic water, which then feeds the healthy cells. And metabolic water is different from the water that we drink because its molecular structure is such that it can enter the cell at a cellular level. And therefore, and hydration, that is where true hydration happens, on a cellular level. And that's why also when we start understanding how all of this, the obstruction is, get lost in all these philosophies, but that when we really just look at how does a cell work, and at a cell, if the cell doesn't have hydration, and if it's dehydrated, it naturally, as a consequence, it becomes acidic, right? And therefore, and it becomes, there's no oxygen. And when all of that happens, that is the perfect setting, the perfect terrain for dis-ease. And that dis-ease is created in the body environment in the same way that when I put my raw fruit scraps in a bucket, I look at them, there's nothing dirty on them, there's no worms on them or anything. I put them in the bucket and I leave them for 2 or 3 days, and then I come back, and what happens? There's worms. Where did they come from? The internal terrain bred life, because life is always stronger than death. Life will always come, and in that case it always comes actually to assist. So these worms that so often we want to go after, and we say, let's kill candida, let's kill all the parasites. It's like, well, hang on, before you go and kill, ask yourself, what are they doing there in the first place? And it's the same thing with disease. Let's go and fight the cancer. Let's fight, what? And I'm battling. Why? Why has cancer come in the first place? And when we ask that question, or why do I have repeated urinary tract infections? Why am I depressed? Then I can start understanding that actually the body is simply trying to assist me, because the body is always working for us. And when I understand that, then I can understand that healing is always possible when I provide the right environment for healing. So I don't know if I missed, because I go off on tangents, which I'm still trying to, I don't know if it will happen in this lifetime that I will learn how to not to, but that's why I need people who bring me back onto, actually you were talking about this thing.
Oh, that's great. Well, I have a similar problem, so I guess we're both experiencing this together. But it was beautiful. It flowed well, and I feel like it covered the real purpose of how someone understands the benefits to something as difficult, at least in the beginning, as fasting. And maybe that leads into, I would say, to give that kind of roadmap for somebody of some of the obstacles and challenges that maybe emerge, and naturally, why it's so important just to continue. I know we covered that in the last one. I think that was a really important piece.
Right. Okay, so with fasting, the importance of fasting is really that you are giving your digestive system a complete break. And so again, energetically, it's a little bit like meditating. When you meditate in complete silence and you're lying down and you're just focusing on your breath, it's very different to when you meditate dancing, And as much as both have their place, but when you go into complete, deep silence and solitude, some deeper magic happens that simply is not able to arise in any other way. And so the same thing happens in the body. When we take away all the other reason for energetic engagement in the body, and so we quiet down the digestive system, then the body actually turns inwards and goes, okay, now I have all the space and energy to concentrate on my healing, because when you're digesting, when you're constantly ingesting food, like most of us, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, the body never has time to do its cleanup job. So it's actually constantly busy with a job that is not its primary job, which is the same thing when we drink constantly water. The kidneys are not there to filter the water that we're drinking. The kidneys are there to filter lymphatic waste out of the body. But if you're constantly keeping them busy with drinking water, they never get to the primary job. So when we fast, the body goes into deep state of healing. And the deeper we go, the deeper, obviously, the layers of obstruction start being removed. And, initially I thought, well, if you fast 3 days or 7 days, that's a lot of fasting. One should be able to get a big chunk of work done. And then when I had my first fast, which I actually dove into 40 days of fasting, and I thought like, wow, for me, that was like climbing the Everest. Like I was waiting for my medal at the end. I did get a medal, but I also realized 40 days of fasting, you barely scratching the surface, which I was so disappointed about. I was like, what do you mean after 40 days, you're barely scratching the surface? And for example, in my case, only after my third 40-day fast and lots of just fruit in between and dry fasting and so forth, did I start expelling parasites. And I think it's so important for people to know that, because the majority of people think, I'll do, a 21-day or whatever it is, 14-day blessed herbs cleanse, and I'll say goodbye to my parasites. It's like, no, unless you, with parasites in particular, unless you actually work with that for 6 months, really hammering, the tinctures and everything, you might as well not do it. And so it goes. So it's very humbling to see just how much obstruction we have accumulated in the body. The other thing, so that's the physical side, but then there is the emotional aspect that happens with fasting. And there also, the deeper we go into the fasting process, the deeper layers of emotions start uncovering, because we all equate food with love. That is what we've all come to really embody. We don't even see it anymore because it's so deeply in the nature of our being. Food equals love. If I offer you a plate of meal, if you come to my house and I say, I've cooked this beautiful food for you, you feel like, oh, I feel so loved and cared for, Meanwhile, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but maybe like I'm offering a plate of, sticky gluten pasta with cheese, and actually I'm poisoning you. I'm not loving you in the least, Obviously the majority of people, they do that unconsciously, but actually when we become conscious, it's like, oh, this is not love, this is poisoning. And so it's also there relearning how can we love ourselves, and to look at how poorly we have been loving ourselves. And that is really, really humbling, because it's a little bit like, the process of non-dualism. It's accepting that all the stuff that we look at as negative, that, well, we are that, we are these creatures that embody the worst of the worst of the worst, and that are living it every day by basically taking us to restaurants and, a nice meal of sticky cheese with jam and that's actually that's hating yourself. Obviously you're not conscious of it, and yet underneath, if you were consciously connected with full awareness to your body, without ideas about what you're doing, that it's nice to eat this, if you unhinge from all of that and you purely have the experience from a pure mind, you would eat this and go, this stuff doesn't feel good in my body. This is not good. But because we have all these ideas, we make it nice, and we buy into the idea that it is nice. And so when we fast and we get confronted with all these feelings, because we can't hide the feelings underneath the apple that we grab, or the salad that we grab, or the cup of tea, or the brownie, or the donut, it doesn't matter. The point is, we all hide our emotions behind food or a cup of tea or whatever it is. And when we can't do that, all of a sudden, that's why fasting makes people so grumpy and angry. And it's like, oh, okay, you fasting, we need to be always careful. And that's because all of a sudden, all the bullshit gets exposed and sort of comes to the surface. And it was, for me, so interesting when I did my first fast, where I realized how much niceties I was engaging in and using to cover up my inadequacy, my not wanting to be direct with people, and all the ways in which we are fake, and we think, oh, we're nice and we're kind, and meanwhile we are not living life the way that we're supposed to. We're not living our full purpose, and we are not serving others with our full truth. And so when I fast, I think I'm kind of like I was going to say, when I fast, the bitch comes out, the fierce kind of warrior comes out, as well as the deeply, deeply soft feminine as well. But sort of like this warrior energy comes out. And I've learned to now embody that energy also when I'm not fasting. And that's been my process of really coming to live my truth, and to see how I was not living my truth by feeding on all these nice foods that kind of like put all this nice obstruction, and they dull us in so many ways. Because, even if we want to briefly go that way, because it is so interesting, even on a sexual level, all this nice food, it dulls our senses. And then we wonder why we are not being multi-orgasmic, why we can't feel a lot deeper into the love that is available there with our partner, husband, whatever, why we can't have this sort of, this tantric love making, which is described in books as if it's something out of this world. Meanwhile, it's accessible to all of us when we are sensitive enough, when we have enough space in our body to feel. When there is not all of this obstruction, then all of a sudden we discover, oh, I don't even need a Tantra course. I am a Tantrika, born, by nature. And we all are. And at the same time, in my first fast, I discovered, wow, when I'm fasting, I feel like I'm the Buddha herself. I can feel and sense everybody. I know exactly what the other person is feeling and where they're at. And it's like, yes, because all of a sudden we are all Buddhas.
Ooh, that's nice. Yes. I can relate to that too. I had done fasts before, but I think there was one fast in particular where it hit very clearly that, okay, well, if I don't need food, well, then what do I really need? And that was in a phase where I was really into the depths of looking to destroy all desire. How do I destroy desire? How do I find that desireless essence? Which, if you come to the foundation, the fundamental desire of the body is in the traditional method is food and water. And so if that is seen clearly that that's not desire, then that real freedom completely emerges, right? And then like you're saying, it emerges into that tantric essence of loving everything exactly as it is, in a deep reverence and a deep relationship, like it is your greatest love. Whether it's this mouse on the table, the computer, a piece of food, or an actual human, it's almost like nothing stands out. It's only this love. And when it's brought forth within another who's also embodying that, then that's when that true explosion of that orgasmic experience really comes forth. So that's a beautiful piece there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Well, I feel that we really dived into some of the core elements, at least to get somebody really initiated into the process. The principles of the mucus-free obstruction element is really, I think, hit home. The aspect of how to approach it in a balanced way that's really progressive, that lends itself to kind of like a leaf in fall, like falling off the tree. Like you'll desire to just naturally fast. Like you'll just surrender into the fast in a very natural way. And then the retraining of the taste buds, I think, is something that really takes a while. But once it happens, we see very clearly, like children these days that want strawberry or cherry candy instead of a strawberry or a cherry. It's like that true, rewiring of the taste buds then emerges back into, a natural flow that really has never been left. And it's the same with realizing the truth of oneself. It's always here. One's already enlightened, but that remembering needs to occur, and the process needs to kind of unfold for that. So I think all those elements are really tackled. Maybe if there's any questions that anyone has, you can open up. I think you can unmute yourself. If not, then just say so in the question box. Yeah, Liam, you have a question?
Hey, my name is Liam. Well, thank you so much, first of all. And I just had a question about fasting. And so I've been playing around with it for the past two years, and I've only done I've done intermittent fasting, which I had a open a eating window of 8 hours and then fast for 16. And I just want to know how you, if that's your definition of fasting, did you eat at all? And also, how did you break your fast? What would you have? Because I know some people say you should break it with either some carbs, or some people would say have some salt, or how would you break your fast?
Right. So all my 40-day fasts were basically grape juice, and it wasn't even raw grape juice. It was pasteurized grape juice, because that's the master fast system. It's a very specific system. It's the system that pretty much I work with exclusively, because it is so deeply effective in clearing obstruction out of the body and in really deeply healing on a cellular level. And so there you're dry fasting for 18 hours every day, and in your 6-hour window you're drinking only grape juice with lemon juice, and you're taking herbal tinctures and bentonite clay, psyllium husk, charcoal to clear, and you're doing enemas. So for me, that is the most effective way of fasting, because you are gathering toxins and then flushing them out. Obviously you can do water fasts, and it's sort of it hasn't called me, and for various reasons, but they're all valid, and I think you can experiment with those. I can only talk about my experience. And so with the master fast, when I broke the fast, I still stayed pretty much raw, in fact all fruit for a while, and then sort of raw fruit, vegetables like cucumbers and tomatoes and all of that also for a long time, and then basically staying predominantly mucus lean. So maybe then I would start incorporating some spelt, but only 3, 4, 5 weeks down the road. And at the same time, I've also broken my fast in a completely wrong way. So, I've made all the mistakes in the book. And, am I done with making mistakes? I have no idea, because I never planned to do my mistakes. They were arisings. And even those were my biggest learnings. And, the funny thing is, I want to tell the story because it's such a profound, especially in terms of non-dual thinking. So after my third fast, 40-day, was 45, I broke the fast, and then sort of had, raw fruit and vegetables, whatever, for the first 3 days, or juices. And then my daughter begged me. She said, no, I really, really want to go and have a burger. And because my kids, even though they mostly eat like us, but I still allow them, to really feel into their body and to make their own choices, and then to learn from their mistakes. And so I don't have any judgment about their journey. I don't impose on them. So she said, I really want a burger. So I said, okay, then we go to the best place where they have organic and so forth, and that's what we're going to have. And I took her there, and as this burger arrived, and she said, can you please cut it in half? But first, I need to preempt that I had observed in myself how weeks prior and during the fast, I had become more and more judgmental of people that were eating meat. And I had built this whole sort of construct about, yeah, actually, you know, eating meat is low consciousness and, you know, da 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 da. So there was this whole sort of like ego thing going on. And as I cut the burger and I gave half for her, 2 seconds later, I simply grabbed that other half, and it was literally as if I was guided by God. And I took the burger, and it had cheese and bacon on it too. So, I mean, it was like the works. And I simply ate that half burger 3 days after breaking my 45-day fast. And it was as if I was eating God himself. It was the most divine, blissful experience. And at the same time, like, there was no judgment, there was no thinking, there was nothing. There was just bliss. And then the judgment started coming for a split second. Was like, but what about this is meat and 3 days into the fast? Are you crazy? And it was as if God was saying, shh, it's all fine. Enjoy. Just be in this blissful moment, because this is also you. And meat previously to that, you know, was never really my thing. Like, I mean, if I would have chosen something, it would have been pizza or whatever. So it was the most unlikely choice. But it's actually one of my most deeply cherished experiences, because it was so beautiful and blissful and divinely guided. And it taught me, like, the lesson there was like, let go of all your fucking judgment, you know, just allow the experience to teach you that if it's in existence, everything has its place, even meat eating. And only when we can disengage from it without judgment, when we can simply look at that burger and go, I don't need it, I don't want it, I don't, you know, but not from a harsh ego judgmental. When there is no desire there, then you've done some work, you know.
Thank you.
Can I answer your question?
Yeah. And also, I was just wondering, do you consume coffee?
No.
No.
Yeah, coffee is deeply acidifying to the body, but also more than anything, it really depletes our adrenals, and all of our adrenals are so deeply depleted already. Literally everybody. And that's really one of the biggest work also about rebuilding a healthy body, is rebuilding healthy adrenals, because the adrenals are connected to the nervous system. And unless we have a deeply stable, well-nourished nervous system, there is no way that we can become fully embodied, peaceful beings, because we always run on this energy that is not centered.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Julie, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Alex, I was, first of all, thank you for sharing again today and sharing from the retreat we were at a couple weeks back. I have copious notes of everything that you've shared, so thank you. I've been exploring or trying eating fruit only after 12 p.m. So I'm doing the fasting, the 12 to 18 hours, depending when was the last time I ate during the evening. I've also, in the last month, stopped working out. I used to be, doing strength training 3 times a week with some cardio work, and I'm exploring that as well as to what type of exercise I'll be doing. And if I am going to be doing some exercise, which most likely will be in the morning, I'm having this fear that I'm not going to have enough energy because I'm not eating, and so on. So I'm just looking either for comments or your comments around that, and exercise too, if you have any insights on that.
Yes, no, I mean, it makes sense that you would have that fear, and I used to have the same. Especially when I was still sick, I kept thinking, how can I, because I wanted to do exercise from an ego perspective, because I was terrified of not being toned, and all these ideas that we have as women, and at the same time, like, my body was so tired, and then I felt like I needed food. So definitely one of the best things that you can do for a while is to actually drop the exercise. And especially when, I mean, I don't know if you're recovering from something or trying to heal something, but, drop the exercise for a while. And for me, it was this process of like, I don't want to exercise for the sake of putting on muscle or like for a third gain. I want to move my body because my body wants to move, and because I want to move my body in a certain way. And so I got to the point where it was like a curiosity of, how does my body want to move? Does it want to do yoga? Does it want to dance? Does it want to do strong things? Because typically I was always like, yeah, let's go to the gym and really like hit the iron, and the tougher the better, and I sweated a bucket, and then I was satisfied, like so masculine, right? And then for the rest of the day I'd be like, I can't do anything. And so obviously there was this inner conflict, and I wanted to see, how does my body want to express itself? And so what I would do for a while is I would simply get up in the morning and I would say, okay, I'm going to show up on my yoga mat, and I will really feel for a few minutes into my body, how does my body want to move today? And I would literally just sort of like fold into that and allow my body to guide me. And sometimes it wanted to dance, and it wanted to dance in a very specific way. And then sometimes the dance I thought was over, and I would be like, okay, thank you, body, I'm done. And as I would hit the door handle to exit the meditation room, I would be like, no, you're not done. We're going back in and we're putting this song. It's like, oh, wow. So now we're dancing this. And it was I did it for about a year, where that was my practice. And it was amazing to feel. Some days it wanted to do push-ups, and it wanted to practice handstand against the wall and feel, the masculine energy. And other times it just wanted to roll on the floor and like move like a baby or whatever. And out of that, eventually I found Kundalini yoga, which my husband had been practicing, but I kept resisting for years. It was like, this is weird. It's all these like weird hand movements and repetitions. And then I sort of fell into that, and I really like, now I love it. I love it, love it, love it. And we do it every day, every morning together. And it's really energizing and really healing. And I still do my dancing on the side, but that's sort of like a core practice now. And at the same time, what I found is that together with the fasting, my body now, as it starts cleaning, it wants to do muscle exercise, but very differently to before. And I found this amazing method, which actually I will include in my detox protocol for people that sort of want to sculpt their bodies, but without straining their adrenals, because most of the exercises, like all this CrossFit stuff, and it really puts such stress on the adrenals that, I mean, unless that's your thing and you're a born athlete, and like, don't go and do CrossFit. Go and do exercise that is actually calming. Essentially, it's a little bit like you want to be doing Tai Chi, but with muscle, using your own body weight for the most part. I don't know if that does that answer your question?
Oh, yes. And it resonates. Everything resonated. So thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Great. Is there any other questions from the group here? I know we had one more question on Facebook, and that was in regards to, where is it? Oh, hemp seeds. Thoughts on hemp seeds. Is it mucus forming or not?
Hemp seeds are fine. Yeah, obviously, I mean, they have high protein and some fat, but they're great. They're certainly perfect for transition. And then I always say, like, your cravings and your needs also will change as you move along. Sometimes, some things will fall away for a while and then they come back in. And sometimes certain things will start producing mucus in the body for some reason. And then you try them again and then you actually find. So, but in general, hemp seeds are great because they're also so versatile for sauces and whatever.
Mm. Great. And that reminds me, actually, I know one question that wasn't answered last time that someone asked after was in regards to, geographical region, in the sense of staying in alignment with the foods in which are geographically aligned, the foods that grow around you are in season. What's your take on that and how that applies to what you've been speaking about?
Right. So yeah, obviously people who live in colder climates like Canada or, you know, whatever, even Europe where there is a winter, I do believe that you need to eat seasonally. So for example, in winter you would then eat citrus fruits and apples. And by the way, you know, raw is not law, so you can eat cooked apples and pears and all of that stuff. But also that I do think in winter time, when that is your climate, you will need a little bit more fat and a little bit more heavier foods in form of, you know, chickpea curry or whatever, or, you know, spelt noodles with cooked broccoli or something, and that you will need a little bit more of that versus the raw fruits, which you can go higher in summer. And even for me, even though Cape Town is not deep winter here, but I notice in the winter time, my body does ask for more avocado. Like in summer, I can sort of have it like once in a blue moon, you know, no problem. But in winter, the body says like, I want that fat. And so I do think eventually, and who knows, maybe for me it's another 10 years, we can be completely fruit only in winter as well. But you know, it's a progression, and it's also like, if it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, also fine, you know?
Great. Yeah, I think it's a great clarification, because yeah, it's minus 40 over here right now, so we're Celsius, so we're having some fun with all of that. But I definitely resonate with that. I mean, in the summer when the sun's out, you're outside, you're breathing deeply, you're connected to the earth with bare feet. Like it's so much easier to be in that mainly fruits raw diet versus when it's this type of weather, the body in a sense is craving for more. So that's a great piece, I think, for us Canadians over here. But is there anything else you wanted to touch on that you feel we didn't cover? I think we went a lot.
We're talking Canadians and so forth, because we touched upon that in the last, where somebody said, what about moose, I think.
Oh, yes.
And so, also there, when you are living in a climate like that, I think it always depends. Like if you're trying to heal from a disease, then, or really kind of like radically improve your health, then first you go through a cleansing period, which I guess it is easier in Canada to do in summer because you can really dig into the fruit. But then once your cleansing period is done, and obviously you're going to repeat and create, leave layer of obstruction after layer. But then in winter, experiment with a little bit of animal protein. It's not even so much the protein, it's just the whole, it's the heaviness, it's the density of the foods that then the body sort of needs in your type of climate, and especially while you're still transitioning. So then I would say have maybe some poached eggs, which are less mucus forming than scrambled or any other form, or also less mucus forming certainly than dairy. And if you do feel the need for meat, then have, moose or whatever, like the wildest form of meat, and also eat it very consciously and kind of medicinally, so that you have some, and then you really allow yourself to feel into, okay, how does that actually feel? And what are the consequences? Like, do I have regular bowel movement still, or does that change? Or, my mood and feelings and so forth. And then you can start making a decision what is working for you or not.
Yeah, great point. I'm gonna go find myself a moose. Oh, I think it's hilarious. So
I know, I didn't even know that you eat moose.
Yeah. Yes, Canadians are, well, I mean, the Native American culture is quite profound over here, so they're into everything. So there's a lot of exploration on that front. And I think that was always an important element, that when I was like the gung-ho vegan for a while, there was an individual, there's a couple that were kind of like my devil's advocate, in the sense of really grounding me back into a more balanced approach with the typical, vegan energy. And a lot of his, conversation was around the Native American approach, which was they don't even have a concept for veganism. You know, they eat, you know, wild meats and all these things, but it's in such a ceremonial, you know, deep, loving, energetic process that it transcends any form of, you know, idealistic, dogmatic way of eating. Because even now, I still feel a subtle inward fear towards putting meat in my body again after, you know, 7 years. I haven't touched it. So I do see the beauty in that, you know, the balanced approach that's very in alignment, which is simply your environment and how your environment or your ecosystem, you know, is operating. So yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this was great. Thank you for those of you that joined us and those on Facebook. You know, you can find Alexandra on Facebook. If you just search through my friends, I made some posts that have tagged her there. This recording will be up as well. I know Alexandra's starting a private group on Facebook as well. That's a little bit more involved for those that are, you know, signed up on, and I'm going to link that all in the recording and the email. If there's anything else, Alexandra, that you wanted to share, feel free, but I think we'll wrap up there.
Yeah, no, that's it. You know where to find me, and yeah, it was great. I always love these, especially when there's questions, because it's easier to lead me into the right.
Wonderful.